Well, welcome everyone. We're excited to be here. Brooklyn has worked very hard, as have I, just collecting all of this information and having everybody here. And so we're excited to put this on and get some of this information out into our community as well, too. Adolescence and substance use is a growing concern. And so, educating ourselves and knowing what's really going on is an important piece of participating in our community, taking care of our families, taking care of the kids they're in, and really just building up our entire community. We're a smaller group here tonight, so any questions you have or any thoughts that you have are welcome throughout the presentation, and we'll have some specific times through the discussion as well. I think it's important to just start off and say nobody here is an expert on substance use. We're pulling from many sources and experiences, and your voice and your experience is going to add a lot to and value to our time together. And so I want you to be thinking through this whole presentation about the value of a potential parent support group. We'd love to launch and host an ongoing peer-led support group for parents to discuss and support one another as they raise their kids and work through this together. Now, let me tell you a little bit about MHRP. You may not be familiar with our organization as a whole. We actually began in 1987 in the basement of a wonderful woman whose daughter had been diagnosed with mental illness, and there was nothing for her. She went into one of the local nonprofits and said, what's there for me as a parent? And they said, really nothing, but you can go ahead and start something up. And so she did. And within a few years, they had a large group of them meeting almost every week. They had bought property for low-income housing, which continues to this day and continues to be offered for people who need that. And through the years, we were initially part of the BC Schizophrenia Society. And then in 2019, along with some of the other branches here on the island of BCSS, we actually broke away to pursue a bit of a broader mandate around mental health and to really branch outside of just the schizophrenia aspect and participate in our community in a bigger perspective. So we've got a long history of excellence in peer support, in education, and community awareness. Now, my name is Stephen Phillips. I'm the executive director of MHRP, and I'm coming here this evening with over a decade of experience of working with teens and parents through a variety of pieces. And so I'm going to turn it over to Brooklyn to introduce herself here.
So hi, my name is Brooklyn. I'm a practicum student for MHRP, and I'm just finishing my social service worker diploma. I actually just graduated last Friday, so it was super exciting. So you may be asking, why am I here? I'm not a parent and I've never been one, but I bring in the perspective of the youth and the lived experience with substance use. I'm going to explain that. So throughout my adolescence, my mother struggled with mental illness and my stepfather was an alcoholic. So both of them wrestled with these things and they still do today. So from my perspective, their relationship was really unhealthy and unstable and abusive tendencies that spilled over to affect me in my adolescence. So as a teen, I really found myself with having those experiences, self-medicating with the stress of just being a teen and coping with my relationships, my growing identity and my future, because we all don't really understand that when we're teenagers. So the things that accelerated with my substance use was my mother attempted suicide. And for that really increased my substance use. And to have friends that would give it to me, so it was super easy to access, and to have a friend group that also really supported that behavior was really easy to get into and also feed my inner pain that I was suffering through my adolescence. And not only that, it was really numbing that pain that I felt through those experiences with my parents. And so as an escape from my sadness, it was a sense of even low self-esteem as a teenager. And so when I was intoxicated, it really just made me feel numb to those feelings. But we all know that when we are intoxicated, we feel happy in that moment, but not when we're sober. And when we keep on prolonging that, it doesn't end up making us feel any better. So it didn't take me long to reach a breaking point with my substance use. And I was lashing out at people when I was intoxicated, and I was hurting them. And I would start fights, and I just really found myself losing control of my body, and that was super scary. So I was afraid of who I would become and, like, what an alcoholic was making me and what alcohol was just really simply making me do, and no longer just really finding relief from my pain. And I was just seeking a sense of belonging, but I had so much built up anger, and the substances were just leaving me just empty. So I found myself just not knowing who I was. And this all came to a head one day when I looked into the mirror and I just simply asked myself, like, who are you? This honestly became like the recovering process for myself, and where I started to notice that I was hurting everyone around me, and how I was acting did not line up with like who I truly am and who I just truly wanted to be. So with these experiences with alcohol and self-medicating, it really just drove me to pursue social service work, because I remember looking at the description of like what it all entails, and I immediately connected to it. And so ultimately, like I stand before you today because as I look back on my younger self, I see a young woman that was honestly just lost and super confused and just didn't know how to handle the situations that I was in and just feeling really, really lonely. So today, I feel that no one should go through that. And my experience has really just driven me a deep compassion in those for teens and you as parents. So this experience just really wants me to come alongside teens and parents to just build a different path for them. And by moving forward vocally with education and throughout this practicum, honestly, just learning and researching about substance use in youth and also growing for myself and my own healing as well has really been beneficial. And lastly, I honestly just wanted to note that you are doing an awesome job as a parent. And honestly, just being here and just wanting to learn is just demonstrating the desire to learn and grow and just engage into substance use with youth. And I honestly just wish I had that sense of education. And I wish my parents would have engaged in this education as well. So um, as I kind of wrap that up, I wanted to just say, why are you here? What are you also hoping to learn today? And with our time together, I would really appreciate for us to just have a sharing moment and yeah.
Good. Well, let's carry on through. We'll have other times to just interact together. One of the most common questions that parents have, that I've experienced when their children are starting to use substance use is, what happened to my baby? This is my little baby child, and now what's going on? The behavior that they're seeing doesn't line up with the young person that they've raised. And that's hard for a parent. They seem to be making strange decisions that are uncharacteristic. And in extreme cases, they're actively engaging in dangerous or destructive behavior. And we're going to call that this evening the Haley factor, which you'll get to in a little bit. But, the developing brain of a teen is deeply impacted by social behavior over logic or safety. And we're going to show you a clip from Abigail Baird, a psychologist and leading researcher on teen development from Vassar College, where she's employed. This video is from one of her lectures, and unfortunately, we don't have the original interview footage, but it still definitely gets its point across. So let's watch this together. And I can send out the original YouTube link for the whole lecture afterwards as well, too.
When you look at the adults, and this is when we compare dangerous things to safe things, the adults show activity when they're making these decisions in their insula and in their amygdala. It looks just like the blue square study. It looks just like that abstract thinking about danger. Thinking about the blue square shocking you is the same thing as thinking about lighting your hair on fire. Your bodily sense is going to go, no, nope. And it's a quick survival-related response. Teenagers not only did not have activity in these areas, Where they had activity was in the most immature portion of their brains, the frontal lobes, the prefrontal cortex. So what were they doing? They were thinking about it. But I don't expect you to take my word for it. I brought a couple of them with me.
Good idea, bad idea to go swimming with sharks. Now, do you see a picture of this of sharks, and anybody can take this answer? You want to take that answer?
Well, sort of, just like a little picture of what could happen, but it sort of depends on if you have like a buddy you're swimming with, then it would be more safe.
You think it's a good idea or a bad idea?
Sort of both, because it could be fun, but you could get hurt too.
What do you think?
It could be a bad idea if you were doing it alone, but it could be like a good idea because it would be a whole new experience if you had like someone guiding you and who really knew how to deal with sharks.
Okay, now let's go
Now
back
watch
over
this
here
girl
to
closely.
You. Do
Watch
you think it's
this
a good
girl closely.
idea or a bad idea?
Well, I kind of agree with Haley that it would be a bad idea if you were alone, but I've heard read magazine stories and stuff of people who have got hurt by sharks when they're swimming, so it kind of scares me a little bit, but it could be kind of an interesting experience.
Well, what do you think here on the
Well,
end?
it could be both bad or good, but I think it'd be kind of cool swimming with sharks. Just it depends, like if they like hurt you or whatever. Like it'd be a bad idea if you're like by yourself. Like I agree with Haley with that one.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, obviously. First of all, I myself have gone swimming with sharks. There are conditions under which it's safe, but none of this information was provided to them. It was a simple, straightforward, generic, should you do this? And it's a really simple, straightforward answer, no. This is from the Lair NewsHour. They came to do a story on us, and I really wish they'd rolled the camera a little longer, because right after they cut it, I said to them, what would your parents want you to say? And they all went, oh, bad idea, no. They know, they understand, but they don't quite have the like, huh? No, it's different. No, my parents would want me to say no. It's very different from, ooh, no, that jolt. The third girl is a little different. She has an abstract response. She has a visceral response, and she even says, I've read things and heard stories about people who got hurt by sharks, so it kind of scares me, but it could be interesting. And so, for any of you who no longer speak 8th grade girl, 7th grade girl, let me translate that for you. Oh God, I don't want to do this, but Haley, please don't kill me. Because Haley, 2 girls down, had already endorsed the idea. The first words out of her mouth after she flips her hair have nothing to do with sharks. The first 2 things she says is, I agree with Haley. And we're going to circle back to Haley because that's actually a very important point. The other thing about these kids that's very important to think about is this clip comes from Woodstock, Vermont. In the average day of a middle schooler in Woodstock, Vermont, what is more likely to kill you, a great white shark or Haley? I say this is functional. This is highly functional. It's absurd to us, but their energy might be in the right place. They're following the lead. Their energy might be in the right place. So the first point here is, what were you thinking? We have to replace with, what were you feeling? But do not say this to a teenager. They already look at us like we have 6 heads. This will increase it to about 10. You don't want to say, like, what were you feeling? No. But appreciate that they might not have the same gut feeling about it. We think about our gut like it's an impulsive thing. Our gut's not impulsive. Our gut is acquired over time. Our gut is a collection of experience that they don't have yet. What we might want to think about is that what we mean by maturation, your head stays about the same size as it is when it's 5. So it's not like it's growing brand new parts. What's happening in there? Things are learning to work together and converse more fluently. Information is passed more quickly. Experience shapes who talks to who and how fluently. So what we need to appreciate is that over time and with more experiences, these decisions will become more automatic.
So let's talk about the frontal cortex. So like after watching that short clip, it now just gave us like the reason why they make the decisions that just don't make sense, or they seem just so out of context. But as Haley explained, they don't have to have a logical consequence to it. So again, the prefrontal cortex is just not developed to help process and cope just with negative emotions. So from their peers, and just by reducing that distress, and their self-worth from their, like, is still developing and growing, that they're feeling that sense of overwhelmness, and making emotional decisions is super challenging for teens. To know how to cope with being an adolescent, and we may be able to just be able to connect with this, like, we're the stages of adolescence and the brain development. And so, like, the key milestones with this is, I've done some research on this topic, and I just wanted to share, like, the stages of the development. So are they have a sense of identity and role confusion. So as a parent, when we look at that, it is allowing them to build their own sense of autonomy. And then another point I wanted to share was, is that when we do give them that sense of space to just create and learn their own pathways, and not just force their own adult framework on them, we can allow them to just build their own connections. And this is really healthy and really good for a teen. And this doesn't mean that all of our adult input isn't needed or is not necessary, but we have to act as partners and not just dictators to them. And it's just not, they're just not developed. And it's just all in biology. So the brain spends, like, early years of our lives forming incredible connections, but we don't need all of these connections in our brain. So when we're using, for an example here, I'll give you Candy Crush. We're playing that. It's not a meaningful connection that we can gain within our into our adults. So when we engage in the process called symphonetic pruning, where it can connect, or it keeps the connections that we need and use, again, that I was explaining, it can begin to discard the other connections. And then during our adolescence, this takes place in the frontal cortex. So it affects our risks and rewards and executive functions through communication and more. And so what does this mean?
Yeah, I think synaptic pruning is one of those pieces, right? If you play a lot of soccer, your brain is going to develop a lot of those pathways. And maybe you played soccer when you were young and then you stopped. I grew up playing piano. I was quite good at it. And then I decided I'd had enough piano playing. So I would have to reform a lot of those pathways. Some of them would still be there, but I would be starting farther back than someone who had just continued that. They can look at notes and their hands know exactly where to go. Their feet know what to do in the midst of that. So when we put together what we heard from Dr. Baird and the development of the brain, as strange as this sounds, it's important to remember that your teen is not in control. It doesn't mean that they're not responsible for their actions, but that the way that our adult brains process information and risk is fundamentally different than the way that they process information as a teen. They're learning new pathways. They're experimenting with this and influenced by all kinds of outside stimuli that change how they act and react. So things like friends' opinions play a disproportionate role in their decision making. Peer pressure is going to be a huge factor in what they do because, as Dr. Baird said, great white shark or Haley, which one's more likely to kill you? Haley's right there and she might kill me. So I'm more keen to keep Haley happy than I am about that great white shark. They're going to be curious about what things feel like or do to their bodies. And so they're trying out these new things. And while we need to hold our kids to account for what they're choosing to do, we need to also do it with a great deal of empathy for their psychological reality as they learn and grow. Who our kids surround themselves with is going to play a large role in their safety and what behaviors they lean into. That's a lot of information, lots of new things in the midst of that. Do you have any comments or questions? Yeah, it's funny, right? They grow so quickly and they're put on a face that's very capable because they are very capable. But you get them into a situation where there's peers or it's something that they're unfamiliar with, and we expect them to react like how we know them. And yet, even just with the empathy as a parent, as hard as that can be when, strange behavior starts to come out, to go, oh, right, this is something that you're still learning and doing. And so I get to be a part of actually helping you form some of these pathways. And I think as we'll talk about a little bit later, as a parent too, we form those pathways of relationship that create safe spaces for them to come to when they go, I'm uncomfortable, I don't know what to do here, rather than knowing that there's going to be judgment there. And maybe my best option is to go somewhere else rather than to, my parents. So let's look at some of this just from the statistics. These numbers over these next few slides are from the US CDC. So this is going to give us some of our US information. We also have some Canadian statistics that are coming up as well too. But I think they're helpful to show cultural level decisions that teens generally make. And you can extrapolate from here to other situations. I think that's safe to say, and read into some of the outside factors, right? Peer pressure, mentors, the desire to fit in, who they surround themselves with. So Brooklyn, why don't you go through some of these statistics?
Yeah, so 48% reported not using a condom. Does that surprise us? Does it? Going through that information that we were learning before, even when we look at this, 14% rode in a car with a drunk driver, and then 23% currently drank alcohol
In the last 30 days.
in the last 30 days.
And so here's the other side of this. When they were talking about cigarettes and vaping and marijuana, 4% of youth were currently smoking cigarettes, which is down significantly from previous decades. So, it's interesting that we can draw from that drop, society level impacts of how we market this, of the restrictions, of even just the materials that they're put into, do have actual effects on that use all the way down into teens. But on the flip side, 18% of teens currently vaped, which is an upward trend. And so we're replacing one thing with another. And 16% of you said they were currently smoking marijuana. And so these are, interesting pieces. All of these involve ingesting something. And we're just seeing that inverse trend as cigarettes and that form of nicotine goes down, vaping and otherwise is going up.
Yeah, so then we made a chart here. So 2015 to 2021 Canadian statistics. So I just wanted to highlight some couple of points that are within this chart. So the high end of the graph is total from 10%. So some of these statistics look super large, but in reality, they've only probably increased by 1 or 2%. So it may look shocking and scary, but some of these have just some different weighing out. So we want to keep in mind that the cannabis use was not tracked until 2019, which is really interesting when we were doing our research. And through Statistics Canada, some of the numbers, when we look at them through 2019 and 2020 and 2021, that was COVID times, right? And so we saw a decrease within some of these numbers. And we can kind of understand why, because a lot of us were just locked in our homes with our parents. And so as a teen, we weren't really able to access the substances. But through our research, we were looking into American statistics as well. And we found out that there was a little bit of an increase with household chemicals or things that household items that you could possibly get a high off of. So that was super interesting when we were looking at those years. And then based on and then it would also talk about that the 3 categories that are most prominent for substance use in youth just doesn't, it's just really mostly we're looking at the higher for heavy drinking, and then also the cannabis use had an increase within those.
Yeah, and as we look at these statistics too, some of these are just marked from Statistics Canada to go, we have these numbers, but I wouldn't treat them as, foundational truths. So they give us an indicator, but definitely some of them definitely had asterisks on them to go, we have these numbers enough that we're willing to publish them, but just don't be treating these like these are, universal truths in the midst of that. So we put them on here for those pieces. And of course, these are the 3 most prominent And as Brooklyn said, in the US in particular, through COVID, they found that a lot of the heavy drinking, the smoking, those pieces that parents generally would look at and frown upon, took a nosedive. But other categories, bleach and otherwise, actually took an uptick, available at home. And so kids were actually taking their substance use and just using it in those pieces, which, I think also brings us to that place of understanding the underlying reality of why some of these kids are using substances. If we don't take care of the actual problem and we're just dealing with the symptoms and substance use, they will always find other outlets for that. So one of the things that I think is an interesting discussion, and obviously our name as a society as Mental Health Recovery Partners, is the difference between mental health and mental illness. Mental health has been defined by the absence of mental illness, such as depression and anxiety. But reality, these things are very different things. We all have mental health. All of us, whether it's good or bad, have those pieces, whereas mental illness is a biological reality. And so, people that are struggling with that illness have real factors that are going on in their brain and in their lives that go beyond just the mental health aspect of what's going on. And people with mental illness still need good mental health in order to do that. So we have to look at all of these pieces as we move forward. And even when we look into teens, we'll talk a little bit about this later. What are those early signs of mental illness? And, Nicole, I'm sure you've come across this. We certainly have, the link between cannabis use and the development of schizophrenia and otherwise. This research is starting to draw some of these pieces, but that doesn't make it universal either. Just because a teenager is using a substance doesn't mean that it's going to develop into schizophrenia or otherwise. But there are other indicators that when they go to the extreme, should give us pause to go, actually, we just want to pursue some help here and get some early intervention, where often some of these pieces can be taken care of before there's a psychotic episode, and get the youth the help that they need. So, we've talked a little bit about this before. We don't need to beleaguer this point, but what's been some of your experience with teens and risky behavior? Did the statistics line up with what you would expect, or so let's talk about some of those early indicators of mental illness, and what we should be looking for in the midst of that. A change in, functioning when you're looking at your youth. You know your youth best. You know their rhythms, you know what's going on in the midst of that. And even though they're changing, and even though there's this independence push in their own lives, I always encourage parents to go like, no, actually, you still know them best. You know their rhythms, you know what normal is. And so when you're beginning to see an abnormal change in your youth, that should give us pause. When we're looking at social withdrawal, which is beyond the, extrovert, introverted side of things. Some kids like to be a little more isolated, and that's okay. But when it starts to turn inward and there's social withdrawal, when there's a drastic change in their academics, they're no longer, finishing assignments and doing those pieces, when we're noticing a change in their appetite, when they start to express sort of a sense of numbness, or the lack of the highs and the lows, a real sort of steady as she goes kind of emotional state, but not in a healthy way, in a withdrawn sort of way. When they're obviously talking about hurting themselves, or when they're talking about hurting other people, these are all signs that go, wait a second, we actually need to just stop here and get some help in the midst of this. And even on the internal side, headaches, stomach aches, often our bodies are going to be expressing some of these psychological realities in a physical manifestation. And so, as a parent, as you're walking through this with them, to keep your eyes out for this, because when things are unbalanced, whether that's mental or physical or emotional or spiritual, that's going to start to manifest itself in other ways. And so for the people that are around them, friends, parents, and otherwise that know them best, they can observe this and actually offer that outside perspective in to go, actually, we do want to get a little bit of help in the midst of this, and get some of that early intervention that might be able to help. And at very least, it shows that we care and we love.
Yeah, so the indicators of substance use. So a loss of appetite. Normally when you're drinking, you don't want to eat. The physical changes, also smoking weed, your eyes, also with alcohol, your skin could be really puffy or discolored. Depression and dissociation is a really common one for substance use. And I can say also for myself, I disassociated a lot towards my parents because I didn't want them to know what I was up to, or didn't want that sense of shame, right? So also the depression aspect, when we are intoxicated, we do things that we don't typically normally do, or we get ourselves in some risky behavior. And so when we wake up the next day, it really affects us emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. Also the cycles of behavior and emotions. So you're unable to process those sense of emotions that you may be experiencing in life stressors. And conflict is another big thing. So the substance use becomes an escape to self-medicate through that conflict and those emotions. And lastly, the social behavior changes. So in a teen, we're going to talk about this school. School is a really important aspect for kids, and it's something that drives them towards their future. And sports and friends, those are really important within a teen's life. And so when those social behaviors become neglected, essentially, when they're using those substances, that is another indicator that they may be using, because within a teen, it's really important for them to graduate and also go into sports and be involved within the community and have a sense of friends. But when we're seeing our teen really disassociate from that or change into a different group that maybe they typically wouldn't hang out with, um, that's a really big indicator for our teens and also some adults as well.
Yeah, I mean, all of these things lead us to a place where none of them are smoking guns, right? But they are all things that point us to go, I need to check in. I need to ask, in the midst of that. And so whether it's, a change in school or friends or social groups, what's going on there? I've just noticed you're not spending out. And that might even be a healthy behavior. Actually, they were going down a different road and I've made that. And so, it opens up those conversations. Often when I've worked with parents in the midst of substance use, they're coming to me or to other leaders in a bit of a panic. What do I do? What happened? And often with a sense of shame themselves. What did I do that caused this? I've instilled something in my child and I don't know what to do at this point. And every time, to sit them down and just have this conversation, say, don't panic. This is not your fault. I've seen kids come from the best families, loving, caring, they're interacting in very healthy ways, and they go down a path, and I've seen other kids that come from homes where you would say there's actually lots of indicators there that would, show substance use. The parents themselves are abusing substances, and the child just goes, I don't want anything to do with that. And so, it is a very individual personal piece for each of these kids, and for parents to just take that shame off of their shoulders and say it's not your fault. Let's come to the table, let's work on this together, and we can pull around. So let's walk through some just practical pieces when we're parenting a youth that's struggling with substance use. The first one seems really simple, but it's also often the hardest. It's learning to listen. And that means not judging. That means not preaching at them, but it's actually just stopping to say, what's going on? This isn't who I know you to be. And so, what brought you to this place? What is it about that that's attractive to you? Or, what's going on in your life? And then just stopping and listening without judgment, allowing them to finish their thoughts and just creating that space for them to come and express themselves in a really healthy way that actually, in a therapy session is actually very helpful for them just to get that out. You're giving them healthy ways to get out some of the stress that may be causing their actual substance use or driving it. We want to look at some of our own resources and what's available to us. And, sometimes for us, that's the way that we change our parenting style and our relationship. There's a lot of stress in this time. As parents, we're moving from them being dependent children to hopefully launching them into independent adulthood. And that's hard for them. They're figuring out their bounds. And as parents, we're figuring out our bounds in the midst of that. How much of that leash do I let out? And I really do want to protect you from a lot of these things, but I can't. And so, figuring out that piece and walking alongside other people alongside you is very helpful. We want to offer them resources, but we don't want to force that on them. They need to make their own choices in the midst of that. And resources aren't useless. Sometimes it feels like they're falling on deaf ears. They're never going to read it. They're never going to actually engage with it. But, let's go back to the synaptic pruning. We need to walk them through what health looks like. And we need to give them the tools to actually work through some of these situations and problems that are coming up. And resources are really helpful for that. They can start to instill some of the framework in their brain that go, oh, actually, I have encountered this before. And what am I going to do about that? Rather than just, I have no idea what I'm going to do. So I'm going to follow, Haley and what she wants to do in the midst of this. I think we also just have to understand, unless they're going to harm themselves or others, we want to give them the space in the midst of this, but unless they're going to harm themselves or others, then we need to directly intervene. So, I talk a lot about independence, and I believe that to be true as we launch our kids. But if there's going to be a moment where they're going to harm themselves or they're harming someone else, it is absolutely appropriate and necessary to intervene in those moments and say, no, actually, this is a boundary. And as an adult, as your parent, I do actually need to step in here in the midst of this. For you, we need to build networks of support. And that's not just for our teens, but also for parents. Where is your safe space to process what's going on? Where are the people that you can talk to that aren't going to come with judgment in the midst of that? I noticed this is what's going on. And people go, oh, well, actually, you are a bad parent. We see this all the time in mental illness, spouses, parents with, who have children with schizophrenia or other severe mental illness, and they go to people and they feel judged in the midst of that. And just having a support group that goes, no, actually, this isn't your fault. You are doing a good job. Wow, that's incredibly hard. It's deeply therapeutic to just begin to process that ourselves. And so that can come from friends, from support groups, from school associations, from faith communities. You need a network of people who are going to support you. And then I think we also have to look at our children and say, what other networks do they have? What other adults are speaking into their life? I was privileged to have lots of adults who spoke into my life, things that I would have never shared with my parents, where it was a safe place. I knew it wasn't going to go anywhere. And they offered me practical, good advice in the midst of that, kept me down a very safe path in the midst of that, because I had that ability to do that. I think it's also appropriate to ask another adult to reach out to your child. You don't have to give all of the information, but to say, hey, they don't have a mentor, they don't have somebody in their life. Would you just be willing to take them out? Would you be willing to, maybe just see if they want to establish a relationship and just poke and prod there a little bit? I don't want to know about any of it. I don't need to know about it. I trust you. And I would just really deeply appreciate that connection with them. And then I think too, any positive peer influences that we can bring around our kids is helpful. Youth clubs, school supports, faith communities, interest groups, sports. These are all things that are going to help build some of those pathways that go, actually, this is what healthy relationship looks like. This is what healthy communities look like, and help our children to really lean into that. We have to allow our kids to grow into young adults. And that's so hard as parents, to give them their autonomy within reason. And do they know that you're there for them? And I'm sure they absolutely do. But, in the midst of some crisis or otherwise, it's really difficult sometimes to just stop and go, look, regardless of what decision you make, whether I agree or disagree, whether you're in a lot of trouble or not that much trouble at all, I will be there to help you pick up the pieces. Please call me. Please know that I'm here for you. And that safe space allows them to experiment safely. It actually helps prevent some of that experimentation in and of itself. But they always know that they can come to you or to another trusted adult without being afraid, without knowing that there's going to be consequences that they're probably already going through, but just avoiding the shame, the stigma, the fear of punishment, and saying, actually, I am here for you. Brooklyn, do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the setting boundaries and what that looks like. And so it is normal to set boundaries, and it's appropriate for you to set boundaries around the relationship that you have with your youth to simply just keep you as a parent safe mentally, physically, and emotionally, right? And I understand that it seems wrong to set boundaries with your child, but to identify what you are not available for and the expectations for your child that have also expected consequences for behaviors. And lastly, just by setting boundaries can create a sense of independence for your youth, and it creates them for their own sense of problem solving. And when they are maybe in a pickle, they can have that sense of you have that boundary and what you expect, um, what your expectations are for your child as well.
Yeah, I
And
love that,
what
Brooklyn. Often when we're, working with people with severe mental illness and working with their caregivers, we just say, you can only care out of your own health. And so
yeah.
sometimes, as hard as that sounds, you need to just stop and make sure that you're healthy. And so, in extreme cases, uh, you get caught up in that whirlwind and you're
Mhm.
lost in the midst of it. And it's important to actually take a step back or to establish those boundaries. Even with teens to go, actually, you need to go someplace else tonight because I need to actually get some sleep because I haven't been sleeping, or whatever that needs to be. You would know your own boundaries, but just to simply say it's important that you as a capable individual adult are healthy and are in a good place yourself. And it's okay to say, I can't have this conversation right now. I'm not in a space where I can do this well.
Yeah, and I think it's like the biggest thing is just saying just saying that I'm not available for that is the biggest thing with boundaries and being
Yeah.
okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is sort of the end of our main presentation. We'll talk a little bit about MHRP after this, but I'd love to just open it up again and say, what stands out to you? How did you relate to it? Did anything surprise you from what we've talked about? your kids are fortunate to have you and to just walk alongside that. I know sometimes as parents you go, there's so much more I wish I could do. There's so much more I want to do, but you're doing a lot, and we should celebrate that piece. We're just going to wrap up this evening with this final slide, and this is one of our key pieces that we say all the time around MHRP. You are not alone. And we mean that genuinely and seriously. Our contact information is down below. You can reach out to us at any point at contact@mhrpci.com or give us a call there at 250-760-6031 or our newly redesigned website. You can grab on there. We got lots of information around particularly mental illness and some of our other programs, and we would love to just continue to expand our programs into these different areas. And so we're just excited to be, serving our community in a different sort of a way here and wanting to expand that as well too. And so Nicole, maybe it works for us to just connect afterwards and see if there's ways that we can partner together to help our communities.